Hello, folks. Welcome to episode 17, season 2 of the GOAT series. I'm your host, Jeremy Hadler. Welcome to Jeremy Hadler's YouTube channel. And today, I'm going to be talking about the greatest Houston Texans player of all time in franchise history up to this point, with special guest Phil Rondo here. And
Hello, I am
yeah,
the honorable Texans fan here.
yes, we have our
Indeed.
honorable experts. The guy does his homework on the Texans every day. He loves Vince Wilfork as his guy
By
here.
by watching them with my
Yes,
eyes physically.
Yes, by watching the Texans with his eyes physically. That's how we consider him an
Indeed.
expert right there.
A lot of pain over the years, a lot of suffering, but a lot of great times as well.
There we go. Let me go with the rules here, folks. Like I always do here on the GOAT series. Like I always do, I got choose 5 candidates. We choose 5 candidates here of who we think is the greatest Texas player of all time in franchise history up to this point. The criteria we look for these candidates is the accomplishments with their team, tenure with the team, how they played, which Phil, our expert, is going to explain on these players, stats with the franchise, how are they on and off the field. We also do an honorable mention like we always do, especially when we have a guest. They have the opportunity to choose an honorable mention if they want to. They get the opportunity to that. And at the end of the video, we choose our ultimate Houston Texans GOAT. We'll start with our special guest. Phil, you get to decide who is your honorable mention.
My honorable mention. So I took a look at your list, and there was one name missing, and that is Matt Schaub,
Okay.
arguably the best quarterback the Texans have ever had. Of course, besides the couple sparks that the masseuse had in his times, good old Assault Watson. But we're past that, of course, and of course
David
we have
Carr.
Stroud, but he still needs a few more
Okay.
years. But he's looking to be the best one. But right now, Matt Schaub is probably historically the best quarterback they've had. Just a really
Okay.
solid numbers.
You wouldn't consider David Carr?
David Carr, no, it's got to be Matt Schaub.
Okay.
No, David Carr, get out of here.
He was up there. He was your very high pick you had many, many years ago.
Yeah, right up next to TJ Yates.
Yep. DJ
Mm,
Yates. Good old player. Good old player. All right.
fantastic player.
Yeah, definitely. All right. For my honorable mention, I got Jonathan Joseph, played 9 seasons for the Texans. He had one second team All Pro, 2-time Pro Bowler. His stats, folks: 17 interceptions, 4 TDs, 118 passes defended, 5 forced fumbles, and a total of 482 total tackles. Phil, we got to tell him about him.
Just a solid player overall, able to really force the offense to make tough decision. And the tackle numbers, especially, really stand out. You want to be someone who gets the person down. We all look at these fancy stats, interceptions and all of that. But at the end of the day, you gotta be able to physically outplay the opponent. That's what he was able to do.
He got a second team All Pro, 2-time Pro Bowler. In the 9 seasons he had, he was very good during his time. Those 482 total tackles is pretty good. Plus those 118 passes defended. I feel like that's pretty good of accomplishment that has to definitely get recognized on this list here.
Absolutely.
All right, and now we get to our first candidate on the board here, ladies and gentlemen. First player on the list is Brian Cushing. Played 9 seasons for the Texans. He won Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's a one-time second team All Pro, one-time Pro Bowler. His stats, folks: 8 interceptions, 30 passes defended, 9 forced fumbles, 13.5 sacks, a total of 664 tackles, and he had 57 QB hits. The one thing that always sticks out about Brian Cushing before I hand over to Phil is that photo of him just bleeding with his nose like JJ Watts, which we were going to talk about, but he
Yep.
had that too. That was one of the things that sticks out to me about Brian Cushing. He just bleeds from like his up here and just start bleeding here. That's the thing that sticks out to me. Phil, what do you got about him?
Yeah, and that's what a lot of the defense that the Texans have structured around is just a lot of aggression. And the main thing that sticks out about Cushing is he was just a maniac on the field. I mean, he very aggressive, very insane player, and I think he definitely struck fear into the offense. And I think he was an incredible player for sure.
Next player on the list is one of Phil's favorite players, and I remember this day for this guy when he got traded. That is DeAndre Hopkins, D-Hop. Played 7 seasons for the Texans. He's a 3 first-team All-Pros, 2 second-team All-Pros, 5-time Pro Bowler, 1-time receiving TDs leader. His stats, folks, with the Texans: 632 receptions, 8,602 receiving yards, 54 receiving TDs, and he had total scrimmage yards of 8,613. Phil, this man was one of your favorites when I remember hanging with you when you started getting into football for the Texans, and this was your guy. And then you had the greatest GM in the world decide, yeah, I'm going to trade him to Arizona. What was that like for you with DeAndre Hopkins?
It was a little upsetting. A lot of stuff from that era and time was upsetting. It was going on the down slope for sure. He was really fun to watch. And I think he's so good at just finding ways to get the ball. He could be covered in so many different ways, and he just finds a way. Chunk it up there. He's down there somewhere. I just remember he'd make some incredible catches every single season. He definitely carried a lot of the offense.
Yes. I think the one thing that sticks out to me, which I've mentioned previously in other episodes of doing the GOAT series, which is about DeAndre Hopkins, is like, as you mentioned, he carried the offense, but look at the quarterbacks he had. Not so good quarterbacks, and he still would play super excellent, even with terrible quarterbacks you can imagine, and he still helped the Texans offense lead them, get to the playoffs 1 year or 2. Like, he helped them go far. Like, that terrible quarterbacks. No offense.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call like Brock Osweiler terrible.
Well, he didn't last that long over there.
He was pretty average, you know.
Okay.
But yeah, he didn't have the best quarterbacks throwing him the ball because it didn't really need to. I mean, he was just so talented.
If you had like an Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, or Josh Allen, something like that, I feel like the Texans, obviously you saw with Watson and Hopkins what they had as a connection, but if you had like what that production you have of DeAndre Hopkins, he had one of those good quarterbacks, who knows what that Texans offense could have done and how far the Texans could have gone, especially like in the playoffs, because as far as I remember, they've gone in recent history was to the AFC divisional round and to the Chiefs where they lost many couple years ago, but who knows what it could have been like if you had one of those great stud quarterbacks.
And the best part about D-Hop is that he wasn't selfish. He'd totally fine just not getting the ball as long as the team was winning.
I think that, yeah, that's another thing that all sticks out to me of how he wasn't that much selfish. He was a great leader on the field too. Of like he just tried to rally, help guys out. Of like they were struggling like during the game and they weren't getting the ball and being upset. He tried to like get in like their heads of like, hey, it's gonna be all right. We got to ride this ship.
Yeah.
See how far it goes.
Absolutely. He took a lot of attention for sure.
Again, one of Phil's favorite players here who got traded for Johnson, who was very good in fantasy football, but not last that long in the Texans history, but good for fantasy wise. And fortunately, that was one of the sad moves that day for Phil when that happened.
Yeah.
So
he had quite a short spurt of a career, didn't he?
He did have a short career. And now he's playing for the Titans. Next on our list we got is another good wide receiver is Andre Johnson. Played 12 seasons for the Texans. He's a Hall of Famer, 2 first-team All-Pros, 2 second-team All-Pros, 7-time Pro Bowler, 2-time receptions leader, 2-time receiving yards leader, made Texans Ring of Honor. His stats, folks: 1,012 receptions, 13,597 receiving yards, 64 receiving TDs, and a total scrimmage yards of 13,651. Now, this is another guy that's like DeAndre Hopkins, only a bit better stats, even though he played more seasons. But I feel like Andre Johnson is the pre-version of DeAndre Hopkins of what we got because of how bad the quarterbacks were for your team, Phil. I feel like he was the pre-version of DeAndre Hopkins.
I agree. He was definitely the guy before D-Hop. And he had his fair share of quarterbacks. That was ringing around the rosy for quite a while there. I want to say he had like 10 different quarterbacks throughout his career. Some crazy like that. Matt Schaub and him were the best chemistry out there, but just an incredible player. Very, very dominant. And incredible.
Great leader. Even if you had a terrible quarterback, he still helped the offense lead the way again. And who would have known, like, if they had the great quarterback, like Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or somebody like that, or Tom Brady even, if you had one of those, it'd be a lot different story about these two guys that we just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was definitely a lot more of a leader than D-Hop.
Next player on the list, which I love watching this guy play as a kid because he was one of my favorites watching as a kid, especially when you play Madden Mobile or you play Madden on the Xbox. This is one of the guys I badly wanted to have on my defense. That is J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt played 10 seasons for the Houston Texans, 3-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year, 1-time Walter Payton Man of the Year, 5 first-team All-Pro, 2 second-team All-Pro, 5 Pro Bowls, 2-time sacks leader, 1-time NFL forced fumbles co-leader. His stats, folks, he had 531 tackles, 101.5 sacks, 61 pass deflections, 25 forced fumbles, 16 fumble recoveries. He set NFL record too, folks, where he had 2 seasons with 20 more tackles, and he had 2 seasons leading the league in sacks. A couple things that stick out to me with J.J. Watt before I hand over to Phil. He had, again, like Brian Cushing, we mentioned this already, about the bloody nose of like everything you want out of the Houston Texas defensive aggression. He had that so much. Now, the big thing, I think a lot of football fans and me and Phil have known this forever, was his injury history. Every year, he always go through some kind of injury. If he was healthy, he was so dominant. But the injuries hurt him so much, whether it was a groin injury, a herniated disc, a leg, torn pec, shoulder. Every year from like 2015, from then on, there was always some type of injury that always occurred with him. That was the thing that always stood out to me because when he was healthy, the Texans defense was amazing and was so good. But because of the hurtness, that hurt the Texans a bit. And he tried to play through that. He tried to play through that a lot. Definitely did. He's a Wisconsin Badger alumni, which I love the Wisconsin Badgers. So love him playing for that team. Brother of Derek Watt and TJ Watt, most fans know, the place for the Pittsburgh Steelers, TJ Watts. Interesting fact I will say about JJ Watt, and Phil might know this already. He almost won the NFL MVP award during his career one time. That was the 2014 season where my quarterback won the award, but he almost won the award for MVP. And not many defensive players win the MVP award because nowadays it's a quarterback award, folks, nowadays. So that's something interesting fact I like to mention to you folks. And one other thing, he in his Walter Payton Man of the Year raised over $40 million for relief and recovery efforts for after Hurricane Harvey for the Houston area because Houston was very affected by Hurricane Harvey. Like the Hurricane Harvey devastated Houston and that city in that area. And J.J. Watt tried to help out Houston and help that area regrow that community and help build it once again. So that's something I like to give appreciation to J.J. Watt and thank him for that. He will definitely be in the Hall of Fame soon. He's retired. Now I hand over to Phil. Phil, what can you tell me about J.J. Watt?
Yeah, that the hurricane that happened was just extremely shocking. That devastated a lot of homes. I believe that was 2017 that happened.
Yeah, I think it was 2017.
And yeah, he's just such a great guy. And he was able to help a little bit. And his character has always been that, just being a really solid guy, really nice guy, despite the way he plays, which is insane watching him. Offenses definitely had to look out for him. Again, with the photo with him with all bloodied and everything, it sticks out to me for sure. He was a absolute monster. He didn't get a lot of appreciation when he was picked at the draft.
No.
People did not like the pick, but he definitely showed them. And he's got to be one of the best defensive ends in the position. Incredible.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, I remember like watching a documentary and he was in it, and his favorite player growing up as a kid was Reggie White because J.J. Watt and his family grew up in the Wisconsin area. But J.J. Watt always looked up to Reggie White because Reggie White was one of the best, if not the best at his position, which we argued about last season. But he always watched Reggie White's tape. He always watched, like, how's he doing this? How's he doing that? And Reggie White was one of the main reasons why he wanted to become a football player. So that was something that was very interesting, too, because J.J. Watt, I mean, that entire family is full of football players and amazing defensive players, and you have a fullback in there, too. But Who knows, honestly, if TJ, his brother, could break his record of for sacks or lead the league in sacks a couple times. But JJ Watt, I feel like to me, he could have been, if it were not for the injuries, I feel like he could have arguably been like top five at his position of the best of all time. If it were not for the injuries, I feel like you can make the argument.
Yeah, the injuries slowed him down a bit. That was certainly a problem. It's a tough sport, obviously. I know early in his career, especially, he would just overexert himself in the gym.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely contributed to a lot of the injuries he had. He was very reckless
Yeah.
because he wanted to give his absolute all 100% for the team.
That was JJ Watt, and that's what I always known him as reckless of on the field of like trying to do whatever it can to win the game. And he helped the Texans win some games and definitely a playoff game too. I remember, I believe it was you guys played, I think the Raiders back then in a wild card match and you guys
Yeah.
won, but JJ Watt was a big piece of that because of the sacks he got in that game and turnovers that occurred when you had that great duo with Watt and Clowney. Like that's a
Yeah.
fantastic duo.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a lot of pressure. Our defense was the main contributor for sure.
Now we get to our last player here, folks, before we get to our ultimate Texans scout. This guy started in one of the greatest sports movies of all time, ladies and gentlemen, Draft Day. And if you go ask our Browns friend, Zach, he'll tell you he loved that movie with Kevin Costner. One of the best, folks. That is Arian Foster, played 7 seasons for the Houston Texans. He has 1 first team All Pro, 1 second team All Pro, 4-time Pro Bowler, 2-time rushing TDs leader, 1-time rushing yards leader. His stats, folks: 6,472 rushing yards, 54 rushing TDs, 249 receptions, 2,268 receiving yards, and a total scrimmage yards of 8,740. Phil, what do you think about him? Because I remember him as a kid, and he was fun to watch, especially when you have fantasy football. Also, I know him for that football movie too, because he played one of the draft prospects, and he had great acting in that movie with Terry Crews.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Fantasy stud for sure. Back in the day, those were simpler times for fantasy, I'm sure. But yeah, Arian Foster, he was just so clean, so smooth on the field. Whenever he was able to run, I mean, he was just definitely the best running back the Texans have ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And he was great, able to get in the end zone as well. And again, he was just smooth. I mean, I think that's the best way to describe him.
All right, and now we get to head over to our final round, folks, of our Ultimate Texans Go. But notice on this list, though, folks, before we get started, of how many of these players, like Texans, they weren't like they were in the league not too long ago when they started in the league, but the amount of the players that we have of candidates on this list really came from the Texans, like this era, this past era, the 2010 decade was really where we saw these Texans players really show up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
JJ
started to
Watt.
have a really good resurgence, right? I mean, they started in 2002, right? So
Yeah.
not a long history there.
Yeah, not a long history. It's been since we were born, but for like the past decade, you had Foster, Watt, Hopkins, Cushing, Joseph, Andre Johnson for like maybe 2 seasons, but still, like almost all these players were from the past decade, and that showed you majority of those great players. But let's get to our Ultimate Texans Go here, folks. We'll start off our guest, Phil. Who is the greatest Texans player of all time?
Personally, oh man, I mean, a lot of great options to choose from. Of course, I'm gonna have to go J.J. Watt, just because of how dominant he was and how much he really carried that defense and led that defense. And also the added factor that he was just such a nice guy. Great off the field, great on the field. What more can you ask for, really?
For me, JJ Watt, like you mentioned, has to be up there. Andre Johnson, carry that offense. Absolutely carry that offense. I mean, dominated his position. He's a Hall of Famer, had the first team All Pros, had great statistics, and was very consistent too. But JJ Watt really dominated his position. Even despite all the injuries, he really dominated his position. And he was very helpful off the field. I mean, we go about that $40 million of raising for the Houston area during after Hurricane Harvey. And he was very dominant, but he was also a very kind and very happy person off the field that would just really want to help out in the community. So for me, I think I have to give it to JJ Watt. I think you have to give it here just because we mentioned how dominant he was as position. We all love watching him, especially how intense and how aggressive he was. Those were some of the things we love watching as kids. But I think you have to look at it too of like, okay, how well did they dominate position, which JJ Watt did? But you also got to look at the side of what were they like off the field? Were they a nice guy? How involved were they in the community? What things did they do to give back? And I think JJ Watt represents the Houston Texans. I think that's the guy that always comes to my mind when I always talk to Phil about the Houston Texans.
He's a true Texans man. He absolutely is.
But folks, that wraps it up here, folks. Make sure you leave a like here on this video and subscribe to the channel if you're not done. Sorry. Leave your thoughts of who do you think is the ultimate Texans GOAT. Who should have been honorable mention? Should have been Yates, TJ Yates, maybe. I don't know.
TJ Yates.
Phil was arguing that earlier. He was arguing that, but I mean, to me, he
almost made the list.
He wasn't that great. But make sure you leave your thoughts and in the chat here, folks. We appreciate it. And once again, thank you, Phil, for joining us as we continue still here on the GOAT series. But thank you once again, Phil.
Of course, yes. Love my Texans. I drink the Kool-Aid every night, and I am happy to be here.
But that'll do it here, folks. That's a wrap on the studio. We'll see you next time for another episode of the GOAT series, folks. Stay tuned.
Peace.